Welcome to the Stop Digging Community Podcast, powered by the nonprofit A² Lamp Groups. I'm Christina, a joyful founding board member since 2014. Your truly unique self-development journey begins today with the first step. Stop digging.
Welcome to the Stop Digging Community Podcast, powered by A² Lamp Groups. We're so happy to be here with you. This is the year that we're focusing on global works. That could be holistic or international. And so we've had the pleasure of working with so many guests that are bringing a new perspective that's going to probably inspire you to some kind of new learning or change in your own life. And that's exactly what we want. But in addition, we have the privilege of having this episode air in May, which is also International Coaching Month. And so if you don't know what coaching is, go find out. You can go to our A²Lamps.org and learn more about coaching. We have some really great things about coaching that we want to share statistically, which is what's going to make our special guest today really stand out as impactful. So, first of all, let me share that coaching actually works. Let me share a couple of statistics. And you know that all of our statistical research gets posted in our LinkedIn group, Stop Digging. So you can go check it out there and check me out as well. First of all, 10-year business failure rates, 80%, which is phenomenal. So anybody who's thinking about starting a business, you should be thinking long-term because 80% of them will fail. Same thing with nonprofits. We've helped a number of nonprofits start. The failure rates for nonprofits, 49 to 77% over a 10-year period of time. Companies, underperformance, costing $300 billion annually, and absenteeism, 550 million workdays lost annually, directly due to stress. $12 billion self-help industry fails 100% of the time, according to research, to sustain any significant personal change. That's staggering because if you're like me, you're always after the latest book or audiobook or model or anything that looks interesting. So I'm just like you, but it alone fails 100% of the time. Also, company-wide change initiatives, their fail rate is about 70%, according to the Harvard Business Review. So with those staggering statistics, here's how coaching is helping. We know from research that it helps people make more impactful decisions, improves stress management, increases optimism, helps you better define your goals, creates stronger relationships at home and work, gives you greater clarity and focus. When you're partnering with a coach, what you're doing is you're changing your story. There's a lot of facts and figures and research that bears this out. And again, that will be in our LinkedIn group, Stop Digging. I encourage you to do that, but it increases at least 50% in all of those areas in a wide range of markers. So go check that out. And the reason why I'm excited about our guest is because coaching is about changing the stories that you're telling yourself. Those are the things that sustain change and inspiration in you. But even more than that, the stories you tell yourself directly impact the stories you tell other people. And it also shapes how you tell those stories to other people. And so today, our guest, I'm really excited about this guy. So he's a professional, an expert, and if you hang on till the end of this show, he's got a freebie for you, and we'll make sure to share that. But let me tell you a little bit about our guest. Dr. Danny Brassel is a highly sought-after speaker, trainer, and coach. He has the greatest professional moniker ever. He's called the Jim Carrey with a PhD, and I love that. So that's a lot of pressure there, Danny, but we're going to see a little bit of that today. He's spoken to over 3,500 audiences worldwide. He's authored 19 books, including Leadership Begins with Motivation and Misfits and Crackpots. He's a co-founder of the Well-Crafted Story Workshop And he works with entrepreneurs, individuals, organizations. He leverages speaking on stages as a major client lead source that converts. And he's here not just to share about stories that we tell, but also he trains other people to publicly speak and share their stories. So, welcome today, Dr. Danny Brassel, the Jim Carrey with a PhD.
Thanks so much for having me, Susan. More importantly, thanks for spreading some joy in the world. We need a lot more of you. I appreciate you.
Oh, definitely. That we all have a part to play for sure, for sure. So tell me, how in the world did you get to do what you're doing? What was that pivotal point in your life that made you jump on stage and help other people and get their stories out?
Yeah, you had the word right there, pivotal. If I was going to write an autobiography, it would probably be called Pivots. 30 years ago, I was a journalist. I had a great job. I got to cover President Bush Sr. in the 1992 presidential election, got to meet every editor of every major daily. And one editor offered me a job doing the city beat for $16,500 a year. Well, then, meanwhile, Susan, a friend of mine said, hey, they're hiring teachers in South Central Los Angeles for $25,000 a year. So I became a teacher for the noblest of reasons, for the high pay. And I just fell in love with teaching. I've actually taught all age levels from preschoolers all the way up to rocket scientists. I can make that claim because I used to teach English as a second language to engineering students at the University of Southern California. Well, in 2005, my wife and I attended a real estate seminar, which turned out to be a scam, and we lost everything. And I could focus on all the negatives, but I'm a positive person, and I learned a lot of great lessons. First of all, my wife is my soulmate. I put her through the ringer, and she stuck by me. She's an incredible human being. Second of all, I learned that money's not everything because you can lose it all just like that. Third, I try not to judge other people because if I was somebody who looked at what I did, I would have said, well, you deserve that. But now I realize if you don't know everything about a person, you really don't know anything about a person. Fourth, I became Christian, which I'm always embarrassed to admit, but the more I read the Bible, I'm not the first screw up to find Jesus. And fifth, I didn't want to file bankruptcy. And my accountant said in order to avoid bankruptcy, I had to make this much money extra. And so I started speaking on the side, and I hit that number right on the number. Well, the next year, Susan, he gave me a much higher number, and I hit that number right on the number. So in year 3, I thought, well, maybe I should set a higher number. And basically, during one of the worst economic downturns in American history, I was able to build up a highly lucrative speaking business that which is rolling along really well. And then in 2020, a thing called COVID occurred, and people asked, how's business? I'm like, oh, it's great. How I just lost 200 speaking engagements overnight because they just shut down the world. And so I had to pivot again. For years, people have been asking me to coach them in speaking, and I always resisted, Susan, because as a teacher, I've always had a very high standard for my students, and I will not let you fail. I hold people accountable. I'm on their backs until they succeed. Well, I kind of stumbled upon working with entrepreneurs and executives who are highly motivated. They do the work, and it's actually one of the most gratifying things I've ever done. So that's a very long answer to your short question, but my life has been very pivotal.
Well, putting a whole lifetime into an encapsulated thing is kind of like what storytelling is about. Like, where do you start when you introduce yourself? Do you want to start with, I was a child, and, or do you want to start midway? One thing that strikes me so much is, well, two things, actually. When you were speaking, you mentioned so many pivotal moments and changes. And most of us, it's hard to just go through one change and to go through sustained change like that. That's a lot. That carries its own stress and confusion. But the second thing is that even though it wasn't maybe what you call the noblest motivation, what you discovered was a hidden motivation. And I can so relate to that because, it was very surprising to me in my 40s to realize that one of my primary motivations was helping people. And, that wasn't even on my radar. In fact, in my early work life, they used to think I was ex-military. I mean, I just was very, very cut and dried and, director, sergeant. And so I think that just for our listeners, being aware that you might have a hidden motivation, something that really kind of drives you that you just haven't discovered yet, that might be the key to helping you sustain all those pivotal moments.
Yeah, I believe every experience serves us in the future.
Well, you have some pivotal moments you shared. Let's talk about some of your passion points, because now that you have this hidden motivation, this teaching other people, and you found this group of people that you like working with, what made you passionate about it? How did you know that that was the right thing?
Oh, that's an interesting question, Susan. Well, I mean, as a teacher, I was serving uh, low income students in South Central Los Angeles. And I grew up hating reading. I mean, my father was a librarian. I always hated the public library. It always smelled funny to me. The furniture was uncomfortable. There was always an elderly woman telling me to be quiet. There's always a freaky homeless guy over by the shelves who thought he was a vampire. I always hated the library. It wasn't until I started working with the kids and saw that I grew up with a lot of advantages a lot of kids didn't have. And I said, shame on me. I mean, I was blessed. Both of my parents were in the home. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we always had food on the table. And my parents always read to us kids, in front of us kids, and we always had plenty of access to reading materials. And so I became a little bit ticked off that not every kid had the same opportunities. And it really emboldened me to really start inspiring my students as much as possible. I've been blessed. My parents were very encouraging. I always had teachers and coaches that encouraged me. And a lot of my students weren't growing up in those types of environments. It's kind of the reason I listen to your podcast. It's always encouraging. I always learn things. I always get gems. I was watching a horrible show on TV last week called The News, and it totally depressed me because it was nothing but negativity. And the reason I listen to podcasts, the reason I read inspiring books is life's too short, man. Everybody needs to back off and take a deep breath. And remember, we only have a limited time here. Let's make it count and let's be kind to one another.
Well, having a sense of humor too. I think sometimes we can be passionate about something and still not be intense about it. Because you can passionately believe religion, politics, values, whatever it is, and you can still be passionate about it. Other people don't need to affect that. So can you laugh about it a little bit? You mentioned that you were uncomfortable sometimes saying that you were a Christian. Well, the fact that that might even be a possibility, we can laugh about that because it is uncomfortable sometimes to stand up for what we believe. But, we can laugh about those uncomfortable moments and still believe what we believe.
Yeah,
you can still be passionate.
That's cool, Susan. I believe, I take my job seriously. I don't take myself too seriously because I ain't all that.
Right.
Neither are you. And if you think you're all that, teach kindergarten for a week. Those little ones will set you straight. I mean, I had one little girl, Loretta. She raises her hand one day in class. I'm like, Loretta, question. She's like, Miss Brassel, when are you going to trim your nose hair? I'm like, this afternoon. Thanks for bringing that to my attention, Loretta. I ain't all that. And people need to really just lighten up a lot more.
Yeah, when you've been through stuff, you can either get really angry about it or you can get a sense of humor about it, I think. And the sense of humor helps it go down just a little bit more. So your passion, you discovered your passion with these, at-risk kids or, kids that were having special challenges. Why were they not your passion, for example, rather than the entrepreneurs and the business leaders? And, what?
Well, I love any of my students. I mean, I began with, I did it the wrong way. I started teaching high school students, then I went down to middle school, then upper elementary, lower elementary, to pretty soon, instead of preparing kids for college, I was coming home with snot marks all over my pants from my little one hugging me. What I learned is what works with a 12th grader does not necessarily work with a kindergartner, but what works with a kindergartner works with all age levels. And even when I'm working with successful CEOs, I'm always getting them up and doing things that they're uncomfortable doing. We're singing, we're dancing, we're laughing, we're joking. I think one of the books I had written, Read, Lead, and Succeed, in the stories that every week I give a concept, an inspirational quote, an inspirational anecdote, a book recommendation on a book you should read, but you're probably too lazy because you're an adult. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation that demonstrates the same concept. You can read that in 5 minutes. But working with the little ones, I realized, gosh, they have a really interesting perspective. And I think all of us can learn a lot from them. And I mean, working with the executives now and the entrepreneurs has just been completely rewarding because when I was teaching middle school, which I think I must have done something wrong in a past life to have taught middle school. When I became a teacher, I made a deal with God. I said, "Dear Lord, I'm never drinking again, and I'm never going to raise my voice or curse again." And after my first day teaching 8th grade, my roommate caught me alone in my bedroom in my boxers, drinking a Budweiser long neck, screaming obscenities at nobody in particular. It ain't easy teaching middle school.
That sounds like my husband and I, when our son was in his junior high years, just tag teaming it. Is it your turn to be locked in your room? Or go deal with your kid?
Yeah, but it's rewarding. And
it's a tough age.
Yeah, it's different. I mean, because with the kids, I had to sell them a lot more. With adults, I mean, especially like your audience, these are people that they're highly motivated. They're seeking better opportunities. When you're 13, you're just an awkward individual. Your body's changing. Your voice is changing. You don't know where you fit in. You don't know if you're a kid or an adult. And it was interesting just looking at that point of view. And it's a big thing I really wish Americans would do more of. Like I've learned I don't need to agree with your point of view, but it's important for me to try and understand your point of view. I think we'd be much better off if people would stop labeling each other and just listen to one another and say, I don't agree with that, but I respect you. It's a pretty simple thing to do when you come to think about it.
Well, yeah, we've gotten into an age where shortcutting it on everything. I've had conversations with younger people that don't think there's value reading or even buying a book because they could just Google everything that they want. And it's like, well, what about all the books and information that's out of print? How do you know who's programming Google that they know? Like you're trusting somebody else, so you're not finding out for yourself. So there is value in not shortcutting it.
Yeah, I think it was.
But I think it was. I'm as guilty as anybody else. I Google the weirdest things at 2 a.m. So it's not. It's just the age that we live in. But I think shortcutting is okay. But you should probably know how to do the long version. Instead of the shortcutting the relationship with you're this and I'm this, spending the time, like you said, to, ask questions because everybody's more than one thing.
Well, especially in the age of AI, I'm learning, and I think a lot of people are learning this pretty quickly, is the answer is no longer as important as understanding how to properly phrase the question. And the more questions you can ask and the better you get at asking questions, the better you'll be served.
That's, I wish you could say that again, because that's really powerful. Because, so often, when we're confused, going through a crisis, seeking a career or a relationship or something, we're always looking for the answer. But maybe we should take some time and learn the right question. That's powerful right there. That actually brings me to the storytelling that you train others to do.
Mm-hmm.
You don't just teach other people to do it, you're doing it yourself. But I mean, how do you get to that point where what questions you're answering?
Yeah, I co-founded a company called the Well-Crafted Story Workshop with Coach Jimmy Hayes Nelson and Dave Ward. I call us the professor, the performer, and the producer because I have an academic background, so you're going to get all kinds of research-based strategies from me. Jimmy was a Broadway actor, and so he's into the stagecraft, and Dave was an attorney, and so he's kind of like the Wizard of Oz behind the scenes working on all of our social media and
pulling the strings and
exactly
making it happen.
Tells us how to market properly and everything. I'll give your audience an exercise. This is one of the first things I actually ask clients to do is later on tonight, get a pen and paper, sit in a comfortable chair with a libation of choice, and for an hour, I want you to write down every story that's ever happened to you. And I don't mean the entire story. I just mean triggers, like the time I locked myself out of the car in front of Costco, the time Dad spilt mustard on his tie at that fancy restaurant. You'll find in an hour, you'll come up with at least 500 of these little anecdotes. So that's the first part of the exercise. The second part of the exercise is then I want you to look at each of those anecdotes and figure out what it's really a story about. Oh, this is really a story about never giving up. Oh, this is a story about kindness. Oh, this is a story about loyalty. And so on my computer, I have hundreds of files with tens of thousands of these stories. So when I'm looking for a story to connect with an audience, I know, okay, here's a story on this that I can use. And it'll make it a lot easier. A lot of people tell me, I work with difficult people. I have no stories. I'm like, all of us have stories. I actually believe that the common stories are actually the best stories. I work with a gentleman from Saudi Arabia. He's climbed the highest peak on every continent. He swam with sharks in Madagascar. He did the Iditarod. I'm like, nobody can relate to you. Nobody's done that. But everybody peed their pants in first grade and got embarrassed. Now that's a connecting story. Is all of us can feel that way. Brene Brown, a really great speaker, she talks about the importance of vulnerability. And I completely agree with her on that point. If I can give one strategy to your audience, it's stop talking about your successes and start talking about your failures, because not everybody in your audience has succeeded, but they've all failed. And the more you talk about your own failures, the more people are going to see themselves in you and connect with you. It's really a much quicker way of connecting with people than sitting there and bragging about all the famous people you know, all the money you make, and all the incredible things you do. That's what Facebook's for.
I was just going to say that sounds an awful lot like, the influencer,
Exactly.
the influencer relationship more than the real ones. I would qualify that just a little bit too, is because I also work with leaders and emerging leaders, and it is true that you should be vulnerable, but I do think that, knowing when to be vulnerable and how to be vulnerable is part of telling an effective story, because you can lose respect if you're constantly talking about all the ways that things didn't work. And I think if you know what the story is, like you were talking about, if you can tie those failures to something that worked or some insight, like a pivot point that you were talking about in your own life, I think that like the exercise you shared is so powerful because it puts context on something that seems insignificant.
Yeah, that's a good clarification point you just gave there, Susan. I mean, it's one thing if you were in prison. It's another thing if you just got out yesterday. It's one thing if you filed for bankruptcy. It's another one if you're filing for bankruptcy right now. I mean, there are things that you have to control on the state. I mean, when I was working with a CEO and he had to connect with his workers. And so he shared when he had started off with the company and made every type of mistake. And I thought that was a really great moment because it showed the workers, hey, I know where you've been. And it's also showing the workers, hey, you keep on working. Someday you might be in the chairman's boardroom with me.
Well, that's actually powerful in the sense that it gives people context for where you are. Mm-hmm. Because one thing that I find is, leaders are always very lonely. They don't have a whole lot of people to talk to. And unfortunately, so many people that work for them think they can do a better job. And they look at them and they think, oh, he's so high and mighty, or she's so powerful and cold and calculating, sitting at the top in her little ivory tower. And the truth of the matter is, if they knew some of the stories of how people got there, they would be like, oh, wow, you really went through it. You deserve to be there. You deserve that salary, perhaps. And I think it lends that understanding when you know how to even asking the right questions of your leaders.
You talked about at the beginning of this podcast, the importance of coaching. That's a common trait I know of all successful leaders is they all have coaches. You look at Tiger Woods, most successful golfer in history. He has a putting coach. He has a driving coach. He has a mental coach. Maybe he should have hired a relationship coach. But you see the importance of hiring coaches. Is the best coaches, most of the people I work with, they're not trying to become speakers. What I'm trying to show them is how to grow your business and your impact through speaking. I mean, some of them are terrified to be on stage. They do billion-dollar deals, but you put them on a stage in front of 10 people and they want to wet their pants. And that's completely natural. I mean, Jerry Seinfeld had the great line that human beings in America, our number one fear is public speaking. Number two is death. So if you ever go to a funeral, more people would rather be in the coffin than delivering the eulogy at that funeral. He's absolutely right. But speaking it's a skill that can be taught. I guarantee you, Susan, the first time you did this podcast, you stunk. And the second time you did this podcast, it stunk. But you didn't stink as bad as the first time. And now it's a finely well-oiled machine because you've been getting in your reps. Same thing with speaking. The more stages we get you on, the more we get you doing it, the more comfortable you're going to become.
Well, and you keep learning too. I mean, sometimes when we start doing things, we don't know what good is. So we have preconceived notions of what a good speech is. But some of the most powerful speech, one of the most powerful speeches I've ever heard was a TED Talk that lasted 5 minutes. And it was about a man who was talking about how he, at 50 years old, learned how to tie his shoes correctly. And he said, I thought for sure that at 50, I knew how to tie my shoes. And, he went through this little story, and I thought that was so powerful just to show what you learned in that one little moment right there. And, I think we all, like you said, have those kinds of micro stories that maybe aren't those big, wide sweeping, I'm a multi-billion-dollar success kind of stories. Like we went from A to Z in, 2.5 seconds. Not many of us have those stories. But if you can paint those micro stories, I think that can change somebody's life and stick with them.
Absolutely. And I always tell people there's two ways you get better at speaking. I mean, first, like you just said, watch speakers. I mean, I watch at least 10 speakers a day. I watch, I watch televangelists. I watch comedians. I watch politicians. I watch them in front of big groups, in front of small groups. I watch them in front of men, in front of women. Here, I'll give your audience a little ninja strategy. I watch a lot of televised award shows. Because when the person wins the Academy Award, they only have 45 seconds to connect with their audience. I want to see how they use their 45 seconds. Now, most people just waste their time. They get up there like, I want to thank God, I want to thank the Academy. Nobody pays attention to them. But every now and then, somebody does an amazing job. So a few years ago at the Academy Awards, there was a gentleman by the name of Joe Walker who won the Academy Award for Best Film Editing. Now, this is the Academy Awards. Hollywood's important people are in the front, the actors. And you can see none of them care.
The names. Yeah.
None of them care. They're not paying attention. And Joe Walker gets on stage. He's British. He speaks very slowly and deliberately. And he says, a lot of people don't know this, but when phrased properly, the term Academy Award nominee can be used as an insult. Well, now the camera scans the audience. You see people leaning in like, what's he talking about? And he says, for example, yesterday, I got in an argument with my 17-year-old daughter, and she said, well, Academy Award nominee Joe Walker. All of a sudden, you see everybody laughing hysterically. He gets off stage. Denzel Washington wants to meet him. Sandra Bullock wants to meet him. Brad Pitt wants to meet him. Time magazine said he was one of the highlights of the Academy Awards. That's the power of connecting. So the first way to become a better speaker is to watch lots of speakers. The second way, I've been blessed. I've hired lots of coaches and mentors throughout my career. And one of my favorite coaches was a guy by the name of Jim Rohn. And Jim used to say, you can't pay other people to do your push-ups. Translation, you got to do the work. You got to get out there. I mean, when I'm working with clients, I'm like, hey, you need to start delivering this speech. I mean, even the smallest towns in America have a Lions Club, an Optimist Club, a Rotary Club, a Kiwanis Club. There's schools, there's churches, temples, synagogues, there's chambers of commerce. I had a guy I worked with 3 years ago, Jason, drove me nuts. Jason was 22, a Debbie Downer. No, I don't know anybody, Danny. I can't get on your stages. And so I was fed up with him. Like, do you have a Facebook account? He's like, yeah. Like, we're going on Facebook Live right now. I'm like, right now. So we went on Facebook Live, and he had to deliver his 45-minute talk that we had created. And one woman from Ontario, Canada, accidentally came on and watched him, and he stunk. And the next day, I made him do it again. I wasn't with him the next day, but I made him do it again. And I think 3 people showed up, and he stunk, but he didn't stink as bad as the first day. Here's the reason I always give Jason as an example, Susan. He's done this every single day for the last 3 years. The consistency is unbelievable to me. The exact same speech. He's now so polished. He has 6,000 people in his Facebook community. And last year, he sold almost $1 million worth of products to those 6,000 people. And the reason it's great that he's made all that money. The reason I use him as an example is because he did the work. He did it. I'm so proud of him. I don't understand people. I have one guy hired me. He's paying me a lot of money to coach him, and he doesn't listen to any of my suggestions. And I'm like,
that's unfortunately that's the life of a consultant, I think.
Hello, friends. Thanks for listening. A Squared Lamp Groups powers this podcast. Their memberships are tax-deductible donations that directly support their work developing people and organizations. But just for you, they're offering podcast listeners a special 40% off coupon code to join. Your benefits as a member include additional resources, perks, and access that you can use all year, including an additional 30 minutes of bonus podcast content for every episode. Simply use the code 4listeners at checkout. That's the number 4, all caps, listeners at checkout. They also are giving our listeners free gifts to use now. Go to their website, asquaredlamps.org/podcast, and download your free My Success Course of Action worksheet. There is no cost, registration, or sales pitch involved. Just click it and save. Use it to work on something significant to you this month, maybe even something that sparks interest from today's podcast. Then click to join our free but private Stop Digging Podcast LinkedIn group, where the conversation continues between you, the hosts, and our guests. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with your friends. And now, back to the program.
But that's one of the great things that you're highlighting here is the value of being able to speak properly. Like there may be listeners here that are like, you know what, I work in the accounting department. Like, why would I need to do a public speak? Well, how are you going to pitch, yourself when you want the raise? Or if you get laid off and you need your next job? Or if you're an emerging leader and it's just you up against somebody else in competition, how do you keep it positive and focus on your story? And, I work with startups as well. And, one of the last things you do is your pitch, because you got to know who you are and what you're doing and what you're offering and your value, but you have to connect it, like you were saying. And so many times, when people work on their elevator pitch, whether it's for a job or a business, it's all about them. But it's not a story that connects with the people that you're trying to connect with. And so you got to have practice to do that. So who do you practice with? How do you practice? Maybe you can share.
Yeah, that's great. It reminds me, one of my favorite stories is the Gladstone-Disraeli paradox. Winston Churchill's mother, Jenny, was a contemporary of Queen Victoria. She knew every famous person in the land. And a reporter asked her one day about the difference between Prime Minister Gladstone and Prime Minister Disraeli. And her response was incredible. It's a great lesson for all of us. She said, well, whenever I left a meeting with Prime Minister Gladstone, I left feeling like, wow, he is the most interesting person I have ever met. But whenever I left a meeting with Prime Minister Disraeli, I left feeling like, wow, I am the most interesting person he has ever met. How do we make the people around us become it's something. Donald Miller has a wonderful company called StoryBrand. I really like what he says. He says, it prepares me as a coach. My job as a coach is to be the guide, the Yoda, and to make my audience or my coaching client, they're the hero. And what can I do to make them the hero? And so whenever you're speaking to anybody, it's kind of one of the biggest roadblocks a lot of my clients have is they feel like, oh, I don't want to sound salesy. I'm like, well, don't think about selling. Think about serving. The more you look, you should be looking at your audience as if they are dying and you have the antidote. And if they don't get your antidote, they will die. And if you look at it that way, that's a different perspective than, hey, buy my stuff.
Well, that goes down to identifying like what the value is, knowing why you're even there. When I work with business startups, I say, once you start a business, you have to learn how to show up as your business. You're not just a person anymore. So you have to look for those opportunities and be ready for them. You mentioned a couple of things, about your examples about people that started off bad. What are the big mistakes that most people make when, like, if somebody got called up at a funeral to give a speech, or in class, or in their workplace? What are some of the biggest mistakes?
Well, so this isn't a mistake as much as it's a personal preference. A lot of people I see, they train people to share their most harrowing moment in life, the most tragic thing ever to happen to them. And there's three reasons why I don't do that. First of all, the world just survived a global pandemic. Everybody had a lot of bad stuff happen to them. I don't think we need to hear another sad story. I think we need more stories of hope. Second of all,
Right.
what I do with people is I teach them how to create what we call a well-crafted story. The president, when I used to cover him, he would have called it a stump speech. You can call it peanut butter and jelly. This is a speech that you deliver again and again to introduce yourself to new audiences. So do you really want to share that sad story again and again? I mean, I have a friend, his daughter was murdered. He has shared that story to over 1,000 audiences. I have no idea how he does it. You got to be stronger than me to talk about the worst day of your life. And third, and this is where people get angry with me, I have one objective when I'm on stage. I want you to leave feeling better than when you came in. I want you laughing, smiling, happy. I think there's something admirable about that as my objective. I believe the people that tell the same sad story again and again, by the 20th time they're telling it, now those are crocodile tears, and now they're being manipulative. And I'm not saying it's not an effective sales technique. It's actually a very effective sales technique. But I personally don't want to have to take a shower after I get on stage because I just manipulated my audience. There's ethical ways to make sure to get your audience to take the next step. Now, really addressing your question. So the very first mistake I see most people make is they brag. I'll give you an example. Jimmy and I were working with a financial planner about 3 months ago named Richard. And Richard started off his talk, I've been in the financial industry for 30 years. I've made my clients over $1 billion. I worked with this famous person and this famous person. I said, time out, Richard. What are the three most important elements of real estate? Location, location, location. It's all right to brag, but you're doing it at the wrong part of your presentation. So we recrafted his opening. And he had shared this story, which I'm like, oh, you got to use that one. So he talks now about the very first client he ever booked 30 years ago. And it's basically a comedy of errors. I have no idea why this person would invest their money with him because he screwed up so many different parts of his pitch. And this was the interesting thing, Susan. So Richard, the way he gets clients is twice a week. He has these intimate presentations with about 15 couples in their 50s at like steak restaurants. So they get a free steak dinner, but they have to listen to him for an hour. And he said this after a couple of weeks. He's like, this is interesting, Danny. Whenever he used to give his talk, the 15 couples, the guy usually has his arms crossed, like, what are you trying to sell me the whole time? And
Well, because his wife probably dragged him there. I mean, just straight up truth.
Free glass of wine, yeah. Now that he's changed his story, he said, Danny, it's amazing. That same guy now is patting his knee because he's laughing so hard at the story. And this is where I get really excited because he said out of the 15 couples, he used to have on average about 6 of them book a call to find out more information about his offer. Now he has 12 of the 15. That's the power of changing the story. And it's because he made himself vulnerable. And then, and that's not the only thing we did to his presentation. The other thing we did is at the close of his presentation, he used to try to woo the audience with lots of numbers and stuff. And I always tell people, of all people, it was Joseph Stalin who said 1 million dead is a statistic. 1 dead is a tragedy. Translation, facts tell, but stories sell. And so now, at the end of his talk, he talks about why he became a financial planner. It's because his uncle, who he idolized growing up, never had a financial planner and he died penniless. And so he made a vow that he would never let other people have to die in disgrace like that. It's really a very powerful ending to his presentation. Okay, so that's the biggest mistake that I see most people make in their talks is they're bragging when they should be trying to connect with their audience. The second biggest one, and this is all the time, is multiple calls to action. I was on a podcast earlier today, and the gentleman that was hosting the podcast at the end of the podcast said, oh, if you like this podcast today, make sure you like it, give it a 5-star review, and subscribe. I'm like, well, you just told your audience to do 3 things. they're not going to do any of them because I always say choices confuse and cause you to lose. There's lots of research on this. Grocery stores, there's a reason Trader Joe's has a higher sales volume than regular grocery stores. It's because when you get mustard at Trader Joe's, it's Trader Joe's mustard. That's your only choice. You go to a Kroger and there's 14 different types of mustard, and it just confuses people and they wind up not making a decision. And so it's very important, and this is what, when we create calls to action for our clients, it can be, if we're working with a nonprofit, it might be an unpaid offer. Check out our website or subscribe to our newsletter. If we're working with an entrepreneur, be it buy my product or invest in my coaching program. That's a paid offer. But we just have them do one thing. I mean, I go to presentations all the time, and the person at the end of the presentation, if you want to keep in touch with me, here's my Facebook, here's my Twitter, here's my email. It's confusing people. You're getting a lower rate of return every single time you do. There's lots of statistics on that. I mean, this is what drives Jimmy crazy about me is I actually look at the research all the time. I mean, I can sit there and statistically show you how many people are going to fulfill your offer based on the number of options you're giving them. And so those are the two biggest things that I see with people. A lot of people, when we talk about stories, they think they can just throw in any story. I'm like, no, there has to be a purpose to the story. We were working with a woman 2 weeks ago. She has the most incredible niche I've ever seen in my life. And just so you know, I never give the real names of any of my clients, and I'm not a person that name drops famous people that I've worked with. So we'll call this woman Kathy. So Kathy, her niche is she designs saddles for professional polo players. Now that's a specific niche. I was like, wow, how much money you make? And she's like, about $800,000 a year. I'm like, holy cow, I need to start designing saddles for polo. She's brilliant. Gosh.
I'll apprentice for 200.
Oh, absolutely. And we've changed her offer was all over the place. She had 20 different things going on. And now she has a very specific, because she couldn't figure out her paid offer. I'm like, well, what's important is just that you can stay in touch with your audience, because then you can keep on serving your audience. And at least you have their contact information. So if you really do want to eventually make an offer, you'll have their contact information. I mean, one of my mentors, Zig Ziglar, at the end of his career, he'd been speaking for 30 years, and he had people go through the research on how many people were moved by his presentations versus his products. And it was like 99 to 1. One person out of 100 would say, oh, your speech really changed my life. And it was the other 99 said, oh, it was your tapes, and it was your books, and it was your emails. And he's like, oh my gosh, I was focused on the wrong thing all this time. I mean, so when we're crafting your story, I mean, you can use it as a keynote, but you can use it as a pitch. The skill that we're teaching you, a lot of my clients, they use it with their kids on how to get their kids to do things for them. There's simple little psychological strategies that we're using that have been, I don't do anything based on opinion. If you want an opinion, ask your Aunt Ethel what she thinks. I do things because, the research shows that this is going to get a higher rate of return. And so that's why we've crafted a presentation in a very specific structure, because then it's a predictable result that way.
Well, you want it, if you're going to put forth the effort, you might as well be where it's going to, you're not working against the wind. You might as well go a little bit with the research with some variation. I did have some questions. I mean, as you're speaking, I have like 1,000 questions of curiosity. So I did try to write a couple of them down. So when you were talking about the crocodile tears and the manipulation, and I completely relate to that. So many of us in the nonprofit world in particular, the way to get donors is the fly in the eyes, problem. So we never wanted to be that in our nonprofit, but that begs the question, what's the difference between repeating something over and over and over again until it becomes rote and it's not authentic anymore, versus practicing?
Yeah, well, and
yeah,
that's a good question, Susan. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I think that you can share. No. I mean, listen to me. I already shared with you that I had a real estate fiasco. That's not a really happy story. But what's important,
Right.
it's the same reason I like watching American movies as opposed to French movies. If Julia Roberts dies in the middle of the American movie, I know that they're going to resuscitate her and she'll be alive by the end of the movie. In a French film, if she dies, I'm like, I think she's dead. I think it's just done. There's no happy ending. It's just depressing. And so that's an American characteristic. All of us love to root for the underdog. And that's why Rocky is one of the greatest movies of all time. So if you watch Rocky, this is a guy, he just keeps on taking a beating. And the reason we love him is he keeps on getting back up. So that's a little bit different. I see people, I'm not going to give examples because I might give away who they are, but they start to speak in a whisper and they speak very slowly to try to move you. And it's very rehearsed and it's very inauthentic to me. Whereas I don't have a problem. I used to chair a nonprofit that we created school libraries for under-resourced areas. And we had all kinds of examples of a kid said, I never had anything to read. And they tell you this whole thing. But then then the pivot is they started working with our nonprofit. And now here's the end success. And now we're doing great. I don't have a problem with that. That's very different than the people that it's horrible. I have very specific people on my mind right now, and they're very successful. But what they're doing is they're manipulating. And if anybody in your audience ever wants to know how to ethically sell, buy the book Influence by Robert Cialdini. He's a professor emeritus at Arizona State University, and he talks about how to influence people ethically. And it's all based on research, nothing manipulative. We need a lot more integrity in the world nowadays. And so that's why I push his book is I'm like, this is a guy that has integrity, that he's not trying to pull a fast one on people. And so that was to clarify what because I agree with you. I mean, in some cases, especially if you're in the nonprofit world, you're going to have to share. I mean, I've been to plenty of presentations with Amnesty International or the Special Olympics or,
Right.
Live Aid or something. And these are depressing stories. I mean, there's just no way around it. I was at a shelter for abused women the other day listening to their stories. What was good about the stories is they rose above that and there's a happy ending. That's what I'm looking for is I want that happy ending because I don't want to just be that one note symphony where it's like a country western song where it's like, I lost my girlfriend, I lost my truck, I lost my dog. I mean, it's like,
buy my album. Yeah. Well, it's funny because it triggered something that actually happened a couple of months ago. I'm part of an executive coaching group and we met. And one of the exercises was we had to go and give our elevator speech for a period of time. I think they gave us like 10 or 15 minutes. And that was one of the things that happened is everybody started off, kind of rough. And then they got to the point where it was pretty honed. And then by the time they got to the fourth or fifth person, it sounded like we were robots. And it was just like, it just seems like every story kind of maybe has a bell curve to it where you kind of have to ramp it up and practice. But when you get to the peak, know that when you get to the peak, don't just stick with the same thing, add the authenticity of the moment to it, maybe a little bit.
Well, and that's why I like humor, Susan, because with humor, yes, I can practice that joke and I can say that joke again and again. There's something very different about that than me all of a sudden saying, the first time my uncle touched me. And I'm like, this is like, this is very manipulative. I don't like this.
So much of my own story, I don't even share, to be honest, unless it's in a very specific context, because I do think that we are shaped by our stories and what we communicate to people tells them what to think about us. And so not that I think just having a little bit of intention and clarity, that valuable exercise you did about putting together your life stories and little vignettes, things that pop out when you were 2 years old and, you got a spanking and somehow that one moment, stuck with you. You don't remember the Disneyland trip your parents took you on, but you remember that one spanking and you were 2 but we all have stories like that. There are just moments in time that just felt different for us. And I love that exercise because, we can look for those threads in all of our stories and find out, we learned something from it, but what does that say about us? What is it we're trying to communicate? Because when we do start telling people our story, we connect with them, but we're also telling them what to think about us.
Yeah. Well,
And
there's
and
intention.
we get stuck in that where I'm not the person who, and I've heard this happen, where somebody shares, I used to be a prostitute and now I'm, a mom but now forevermore, she's now the lady who used to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I think the way we tell our stories and what we choose to tell in the right context can really, not just influence, but I think it's powerful in that we tell other people what we think about ourselves and our businesses and whatever. So how has your story changed? Kind of close to the end here, and I want to make sure we get your offer out on the table here. But what happened to you in your story? Like, how did you choose?
Well, before that, first of all, I want to go back to intention because intention is important. So, for example, when we were working with Kathy a couple of weeks ago, the saddle specialist for polo players,
right?
When we got to her offer, she was having struggles with it. And I said, well, what do you want people to understand? What's the teaching point here? And she said, I want them to realize they can't do it themselves. They need to hire an expert. I'm like, bingo. Okay. So what you need to do is you have to have a hire an expert story that has nothing to do with what you do for a living. She's like, give me an example. I'm like, okay. I'm like, many years ago, my wife and I, we had theater tickets. We were dressed to the nines, driving to the theater, and we got a flat tire. And my wife, she said, well, I'll call AAA. I'm like, we don't have to call AAA. I'm a man. I can fix a flat tire. So I went into the trunk and I got the spare tire, and I got the pumper thing and the thing that's shaped like an X. And I started trying to get this tire changed. And 27 minutes later, I have grease all over me. The tire hasn't been changed. And my wife is shaking her head like I could have done so much better than this guy. Well, unbeknownst to me, she had called AAA while I was trying to change the tire. And this tow truck shows up. Some 17-year-old punk hops out of the tow truck, and in 3 minutes flat, he changed the tire. I think there are times in life when all of us think we can do it ourselves. But if we want to save time, we want to save money, and we want to save a whole lot of headache, we hire an expert. That was the example to show her this is how you use stories to demonstrate things. How has my story changed? I try to keep things always lively and happy. But things, you had talked about it. You have different experiences on different stages. I was speaking to a school in India many years ago, and got all the kids all fired up. They were all excited, coming up to me afterwards, saying, oh, this is great or whatever. Now, all of a sudden, I see this 6-year-old boy has tears in his eyes. He's looking up at me, and he said, how can I succeed? And I notice he's missing his left arm. And so I crouched down to his eye level, and I say, when I was your age, I went to 18 different schools before I was 12 years old. Everybody called me stupid because I stuttered. And eventually I went to a school, and a teacher, she worked one-on-one with me, and she would sing things to me, and I would sing them back. I didn't have my stutter, kind of like the movie The King's Speech. And eventually I lost my stutter and I became a swan. But I looked at that boy in the eyes and I said, isn't it interesting that the little boy that everybody said was stupid because he couldn't talk right now gets paid ridiculous sums of money to travel the world to do what? And he gets the biggest grin on his face. He's like, speak. I'm like, don't let anybody ever tell you what you can't do. The world is your oyster. And so, I try to use, I like the funny stories, but that story, that just came out of me because I was with this kid, and the kid reminded me of me when I was a kid feeling down. My youngest daughter, this teacher told her she couldn't do something. She had this project she wanted to do, and the teacher said, oh, you could never do that. And I told my daughter, she liked what I said. I said, when a person tells you can't, what they're really saying is they can't. So don't let it get to you. Don't let other people put their limitations on you. I guess in terms of how my story's constantly evolving, it really depends on my clients. I actually love working with different clients in different industries because I'm learning all kinds of different things. I'm learning that I'm good at I was working with an engineer from Silicon Valley recently. He's an Indian guy, very introverted. And he's like, Dunny, please make me funny. And, you don't have to be a stand-up comedian to connect with your audience. You just got to get.
And you're like, bam, here's my wand. You're funny.
Yeah. Well, what I did is so he has a very difficult name to pronounce. I'm not going to tell you his name, but so now he starts off his president. Let me think of an Indian name. So now he starts off his presentation. He's like, hello, my name is Shubunakar Majahardin. Gee, I sure hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And what it does is it gets the audience just to smile like, oh, he's making fun of himself. I just think whenever you can make fun of yourself a little bit, I mean, whenever I give political examples, it has nothing to do with the politics. It's just based on the speaking. President Reagan was an amazing speaker.
Oh, he's a master speaker. I've studied some of his speeches, and his delivery was almost as important as the content.
He laughed at himself all the time. Here he is. Here's a millionaire from Bel Air, California, who was able to connect with auto workers in Detroit, thinking, hey, I can share a beer with this guy. That's power. And it was because he was very self-effacing all the time. And, I just don't like.
And he was funny.
Yeah, he's very funny. I mean, the second presidential election in 1984, his first debate against Vice President Mondale, he was forgetting all kinds of things. He had all these statistics in his head. He was forgetting things. And
the famous age joke. I love that.
So the second debate, the very first question they asked him is, Mr. President, you forgot a lot of stuff. Is age going to be an issue in this campaign? And Reagan just grins. He's like, I'm not going to make age an issue in this campaign. I am not going to point out to the American people my opponent's youth and inexperience. He got Mondale laughing. I'm like, he won the election just with that line. I mean, not just with that line, but it was amazing. Right. But he's able to make fun of things, and I get a kick when people can just laugh at themselves. I mean, if I would in this last presidential election, if I was advising President Trump and President Biden, with President Biden, I would have said, well, make fun of your age. Because if you make fun of your age, it's no longer an issue. They can't make fun of it. And if I was President Trump, I'd say, well, make fun of your humility. Nobody's humbler than me. I'm the most humble person. If you take comedians are the smartest people about it. Watch this, Susan. If you watch comedians, watch Kevin Hart is a short black guy. So he makes a lot of jokes about being a short black guy. Jim Gaffigan's a big fat white guy. So he makes a lot of jokes about being a big fat white guy. Take your weakness, turn it into your strength. It's one of the easiest strategies to make yourself able to connect much quicker with your audience.
I love that. And okay, so the last thing that I want to talk, because we're running out of time here, I would love to continue this conversation. For the members of A Squared Lamp Groups, you actually get 30 more minutes of bonus content where he's going to be sharing the 4 C's. He's going to give us some tools to follow.
There's 5 C's. I'm going to
five. I miscounted. 5. We get a bonus on a bonus. So if you're a member, stick around. You've got 30 more minutes of bonus content where we're going to keep talking with Danny here. But we were talking about experts. So the biggest impact that working with an expert has is that it reduces the time that it takes for you to do what you want to do, because you're learning from people who can guide you past all of the jungle obstacles that you might have to go through if you have to do it on your own. Whether it's speaking, whether it's, job or leadership with me or with him, we can help you get there quicker. Right. And he has a free tool that he wants to offer to all of our listeners. And we're so grateful for that, because that's all we want to do is help our listeners. So www.freestoryguide.com.
Yeah, free story guide, like tour guide, freestoryguide.com. What you'll get is a a blueprint for our well-crafted storytelling workshop. What this is it's the actual system we take our clients through on how to develop their presentations. What it does for you is it takes the guesswork out of putting together your presentation, putting things in the right places. And what this means for you is the peace of mind to acquire a lot more clients and make a lot bigger impact on the audiences that you serve. You can get that at freestoryguide.com. And again, Susan, I just am so grateful for you. And I agree with you. You work with
we had fun.
Yeah, work with an expert. So instead of taking the stairs, you're taking the elevator.
Yeah. So if you want to see the research on coaching or learn more about membership or whatever for A Squared, go to our LinkedIn page, go to our Stop Digging group. You can just search for it and find it. Join the conversation. If you have a story that you want to share, post it there. We got people in there who can comment or help, or if you've got a resource, we're there. And definitely go to freestoryguide.com and download or follow his plan. If you're a member of A Squared already, stick around. We got some more fun stuff for you. Thank you so much, Danny. And we'll be back in a minute.
Thanks, Susan. God bless.
Hi, this is Chris, podcast team coordinator for A Squared Lamp Groups. Thank you for listening and subscribing to the Stop Digging Community Podcast. Keep the conversation going. Search for the Stop Digging group on LinkedIn and don't miss out on our next episode.